I'm just trying to understand why they're saying there's 5 sexes in humans when there's clearly 2. I say that as someone who's studied biology for a long time.
Today I sit down with Colin Wright, an evolutionary biologist and founding editor of Reality's Last Stand. His cartoon about his sense of alienation from the left went viral after it was retweeted by Elon Musk.
So it's not that kids are even confused about whether they're trans. They'll literally be told, if you're gender nonconforming, then you're trans. You know, maybe we can give this person puberty blockers, which is sort of a gateway to cross-sex hormones and surgeries and things like that.
He explains why gender ideology is so damaging to society and how he sees universities using diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, to determine hiring, promotions, and tenure.
And at Berkeley, and increasingly at more universities, they're using these DEI statements as a first filter. You know, I view them as political litmus tests because there is only one way to write these things.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanye Kelly. Colin Wright, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me. This is fantastic.
I agree. I've wanted to talk to you for a while, and we have this perfect opportunity with Elon Musk having tweeted this graphic, very, very interesting graphic. And so how did this graphic come about?
It's been such a bizarre week after that happened, yeah. You know, this is a cartoon that I just created one night in my pajamas. And it sort of just was meant to have me just sort out my own feelings of being sort of alienated from, I guess, the political left on a lot of issues that I felt were very, like, core for me. Issues like freedom of speech, that normally on the left were viewed as sort of the sacrosanct value in order to speak truth to power. It's being increasingly viewed as being, you know, with suspicion. You see it published in articles with scare quotes like quote-unquote free speech. And it's even being accused of being dangerous to democracy and minorities. Other issues such as, you know, the old value of treating people and judging people by the content of their character instead of by the color of their skin. I've seen recently these new ideas ushered in, sort of this identity politics, these equity initiatives that are basing rights on group interests instead of individual rights. And then on a topic that's sort of closest to me is the whole women's rights issue, where we've now seen this sort of shift on the left of what a woman even is. Is it even definable? Is it related to biology? And so I come from a background in evolutionary biology where I saw people sort of making these weird claims about sex and about gender and are they the same, are they different? And when I started pushing back against this stuff, you know, using scientific arguments, I was just called all these crazy names. And so on all these topics where I previously identified with them, you know, these are core, I just no longer really see them best represented on the political left, and it's made me, and I think a lot of others, and if you identify with that cartoon, maybe feeling sort of politically homeless in a certain way, or at least you don't see those values on the left anymore. So, you know, I'm a lifelong Democrat, and this cartoon represents those core values, but not necessarily every axis, but at least on these core values that I felt that caused me to vote Democrat. That's what this cartoon really represents for me.
You mentioned you noticed, you know, some of these subtle changes, but I think it was really in your work that you first started just kind of asking yourself, what am I doing? And so tell me about that.
That was a very slow burn, and I didn't even really notice the change until I had changed so much. You know, I started out going, you know, as an undergrad, wanted to become a professor studying evolutionary biology. So, you know, I went and got into graduate school, started a lab. You start meeting other faculty and things like that. You might, you know, if you had some pictures from undergrad of you at a party or something, maybe you'll take those off your you know, your timeline or something. And then it was other things like, oh, what pages was I liking on those things? Maybe, you know, oh, this is maybe a controversial thing, and I just want to make sure because it's public, and I've had some advisors were following me on Facebook. And it was just really sort of incremental over time until I got to the point where I'm at Penn State and I'm doing my postdoctoral fellowship there. And I'm just like closing down every single bit of my social media. What pages am I liking anything? I don't like any pages because I'm not sure which ones are going to be okay to talk about. I started seeing these articles being published saying that there's, you know, 5 sexes and things like that. And I would just make an initial question, like, what do they mean by this? And I was just immediately attacked. And I just slowly realized, looking back, like my initial reasons for going into academia were so I could ask these types of questions. I could ask any questions. I thought academia was the place where you ask questions and you receive feedback from people who aren't going to attack you, the person, but they're going to attack the idea. And everyone realizes that we're all playing the truth game and trying to just find out what's truth. But I wasn't getting that. I wasn't getting people, just asking me questions back, and why do you think that way? Here's this evidence, here's that. It was this, you're being transphobic, you're a bigot, this is rooted in white supremacy, all this type of stuff. And I'm just trying to understand why they were saying there's 5 sexes in humans when there's clearly 2. Because I say that as someone who's studied biology for a long time. So it was just this slow shift. I think it's just because each day you're not changing very much. You're not self-censoring a whole lot each day. It's little by little, until I got to the point where I realized how completely muzzled I made myself.
So is there some specific moment where you made a decision to shift gears?
There was a series of events. So there was the Sokal Squared hoax, the James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, Peter Boghossian, where they had sort of they put these, I guess, hoax papers, although they were legitimate papers they put in. A lot of them were just using the same arguments they would, and some weren't based on data. So they got these into some journals that dealt with like gender, and I had already been questioning this whole like gender ideology. What do people mean when they say they identify as a man or a woman as opposed to just being a man or a woman? And then we had the Scientific American. They published an article that was called like the sex spectrum. It was this beautiful diagram that just showed male and female on each side. Then they had like this big spectrum in between, and it was saying, there's no such thing as male or female. We're all just sort of clouds of maleness and femaleness, and you can reside anywhere on this spectrum. And then there was an article in Nature. I think it was called Sex Redefined, and the subtitle was the idea of 2 sexes is now viewed as overly simplistic. And then, and there were just these terrible arguments looking at chromosomes and talking about hormones, and these things don't make male or female. They're just, they're associated with that. And these were so easily debunked, and to see them in such like these prestigious platforms. I mean, Scientific American is not a journal, but it's a popular, trusted scientific outlet anyway. But then Nature, this is like the most prestigious journal in the entire world. And when I saw that it was in Nature, I couldn't really stay quiet anymore. I literally asked myself, what would Christopher Hitchens do? Because I knew this would potentially be career suicide. Both my advisors, my advisor and my mentor, both told me not to publish my initial article in Quillette on this. But I just realized, like, I studied animal personality, social behavior, and I just couldn't deal with the fact that I'd be potentially teaching my work on collective behavior and social spiders or wasp personalities, when half my class might not even know what a male and female is, or might not even be convinced that those are even real biological categories. I couldn't care about the minutia when the big picture was seeming to be distorted behind me.